A couple is enjoying a day in the backyard. The wife bends over to pick something up, and her husband, eyeing her from behind, smirks and says, "Wow, your is bigger than the BBQ." She looks back, upset, and replies, "No, it's not." A little argument follows, and he, ever the curious one, grabs a tape measure. He measures both the BBQ and her behind, and to his surprise, yep, her is indeed bigger than the BBQ. She silently walks into the house, a little miffed. That night, they're both in bed. He moves closer, ready to have some fun, but she turns to him and says, "Do you really think I'm gonna fire up that huge BBQ just for one little wiener?" A woman goes to a hospital. "What seems to be the problem?" the doctor asked. The lady said, "Something is terribly wrong. I keep finding postage stamps from Limpopo in my The doctor had a look, laughed really hard and said, "Ma'am, these are not postage stamps, my dear. These are stickers from bananas and cucumbers." "Doctor, there's a piece of lettuce sticking out of my bottom." The doctor asks him to drop his trousers and examines him. The man asks, "Is it serious, doctor?" And the doctor replies, "I'm sorry to tell you, but this is just the tip of the iceberg." Stalin was visiting a small town in Russia. Huge crowd was there to receive him, holding signs with words of praise for Stalin, the party, the union, etc. Among them, secret police officers spotted a particularly old man holding a sign saying, "Thank you, Comrade Stalin, for a happy childhood." Officers approached him angrily. "What is this? Some kind of mockery? You must be at least 80 years old. Comrade Stalin wasn't even born when you were a child." Old man said, "That's exactly what I'm thankful for." Dave was lounging on his front porch, sipping a cold drink and enjoying the afternoon sun, when he noticed his blonde neighbor, Lisa, step outside. She walked straight to her mailbox, opened it, stared for a moment, then frowned and went back inside. A few minutes later, she came out again, checked the mailbox, and walked back in, shaking her head. By the third time, Dave was hooked. He leaned forward, watching as she marched out, yanked open the mailbox, and let out an exasperated sigh. Curiosity got the better of him. "Lisa, everything okay?" he called. She threw her hands up. "No, my stupid computer keeps saying I've got mail, but there's nothing here." Dave nearly fell out of his chair laughing. An advertising team is burning the midnight oil when, out of nowhere, a genie pops up, offering each of them a wish. The copywriter says, "I've always dreamed of writing the great American novel. I want to go to a tropical island to focus and write my masterpiece." The genie says, "Done." Poof! The copywriter is gone. The art director says, "I want to create a painting so beautiful, it'll hang in the Louvre. Send me to the French countryside to work on it." The genie says, "Consider it done." Poof! The art director vanishes. The genie turns to the account executive and asks, "And what is your wish?" The account exec grins and says, "I want those two arseholes back here right now." Who else can relate to this? A little boy hops on a bus and sits right behind the driver. Grinning, he starts chattering, "If my mom was a hen and my dad was a rooster, I'd be a little chick." The bus driver sighs, "Oh great, one of these kids." The boy keeps going, "If my mom was a cow and my dad was a bull, I'd be a little calf." The driver groans, "Kid, please shut up." But the boy? Oh, he's just getting started. "If my mom was a female elephant and my dad was a male elephant, I'd be a little elephant." The driver grips the wheel tighter. "I said shut up!" Still, the kid doesn't quit. "If my mom was a dog and my dad was a dog, I'd be a little puppy." The driver snaps, "All right, kid, what if your mom was a waitress and your dad was unemployed? What would you be then?" Without missing a beat, the boy smirks and says, "A bus driver." The bus nearly swerves off the road. I patted my pockets. No keys. Panic set in. Then it hit me. I must have left them in the car. Heart pounding, I bolted to the parking lot. My husband always scolds me for leaving my keys in the ignition, saying, "One day, someone's gonna steal that car." Well, guess what? He was right. The car was gone, vanished. Frantically, I called the police. "I left my keys in the car. And now it's stolen," I confessed, feeling like the world's biggest fool. Then came the hardest call of all, to my husband. "Honey, I left my keys in the car and..." I took a deep breath. "It's been stolen." Silence. Long, terrifying silence. Then finally, his voice. Slow, deliberate, pissed. "Are you kidding me? I dropped you off." My heart stopped. And now I was the fool. Embarrassed, I mumbled, "Can you come get me?" His reply? "Yeah, just as soon as I convince this cop that I didn't steal your damn car." Ah, the golden years. Full of wisdom and senior moments. The doctor looked Joe straight in the eye and said, "I've got good news and bad news. The good news is I can cure your headaches. The bad news, we gotta remove your family jewels." Joe's jaw hit the floor. "Wait, what?" The doctor sighed. "You have a rare condition. Your, gentleman's department is pressing against your spine, causing massive headaches. The only fix is castration." Joe was devastated. Was life even worth living without his best buddies? But after years of migraines, he finally gave in. Post-surgery, Joe walked out of the hospital headache-free for the first time in 20 years. He should have been thrilled, but something felt missing, like an important part of him had been left behind. Oh, right. Determined to start fresh, he spotted a men's clothing store and strutted in. "I need a new suit," he told the salesman. The old tailor sized him up. "Let's see. 44 long." Joe blinked. "That's exactly right. How'd you know?" "Been in the business 60 years. Joe tried on the suit. "A perfect fit." The salesman nodded. "How about a new shirt?" Joe shrugged. "Sure." The salesman squinted. 34 sleeve, 16 and a half neck. Joe gasped. "Unbelievable, how'd you do that?" "Been in the business 60 years. Joe put on the shirt. It fit like a dream. "Shoes?" the salesman asked. Joe grinned. "Why not?" The salesman glanced at his feet. 9.5 E. Joe's jaw dropped. "Okay, now this is freaky." "Been in the business 60 years. Joe slipped on the shoes. Perfect fit again. The salesman smiled. "How about some new underwear?" Joe hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, size 34. The salesman frowned. "Nah, you need a 36. Joe laughed. "Ha! Gotcha. I've been wearing a 34 since I was 18. The salesman shook his head. "Son, if you wear a 34, it'll press your testicles against your spine and give you one hell of a headache." Joe fainted. Little Sally asked her dad if she could take her dog, Fluffy, for a walk around the block. He said no because Fluffy was in heat. Sally, curious, asked, "What does in heat mean?" Without explaining, her dad grabbed a rag soaked in gas, wiped the dog's rear end with it, and told her, "Go around the block and come straight home." When she returned, Sally was by herself. Her dad asked, "Where's Fluffy?" Sally shrugged and said, "Fluffy ran out of gas a few blocks back, and another dog is pushing her home." A woman found herself standing before the gates of heaven, waiting anxiously to meet St. Peter. When he appeared, he welcomed her and said, "Before you can enter, there's just one more thing you need to do." Excited, the woman asked, "What must I do?" St. Peter smiled and said, "Spell any four-letter word." Without hesitation, the woman replied, "Love, Love." St. Peter nodded approvingly. "Well done. You have a pure heart," he said. Then, in a playful tone, he added, "I need to take a short break. Would you mind watching the gates for just a few minutes?" The woman agreed, taking St. Peter's seat, feeling a bit like she was in charge. But then, something surprising happened. A man appeared at the gates. As he got closer, she realized with shock that it was her husband. "Why are you here?" she exclaimed, confused. Her husband looked at her, stunned. I don't understand. I was so distraught when I left your funeral. I was in an accident. Am I really in heaven?" The woman took a deep breath and smiled softly. "Not yet. You still need to spell a word first." Her husband blinked in confusion. "What word?" She leaned forward and said, "Czechoslovakia." It's a reminder of how things can easily go wrong with just one simple mistake. Take, for instance, a man from Illinois who had been traveling from the snowy streets of Chicago to warm Florida for a vacation. His wife was still on a business trip, but was set to join him the next day. He checked into his hotel and, forgetting where he had written her email address, tried his best to remember it. In his haste, he made a single error and accidentally sent the message to a grieving widow who had lost her husband the day before. When the widow opened her email, she read the subject line and the note that followed. "Dearest wife, just got checked in. Everything is ready for your arrival tomorrow. P.S. Sure is hot down here." The widow fainted at the sight of the email, and her family rushed in, horrified at what they assumed was a message from the beyond. Toward the far end of the golf course, Dave somehow managed to slice his ball straight into the woods, where he found it nestled in a patch of bright yellow buttercups. Determined to get his ball back in play, he took a few aggressive swings, promptly destroying nearly every buttercup in sight. Suddenly, poof! With a puff of smoke, a tiny old woman appeared out of nowhere. "I am Mother Nature," she declared. "Do you have any idea how long it took me to grow those buttercups? For your carelessness, I curse you. From this moment forward, you shall never have butter for your popcorn. No butter for your toast. No butter for anything, for the rest of your life." And with that, poof, she vanished. Still shaken, Dave took a deep breath and shouted, "Fred, where are you?" From the distance, Fred called back, "Over here, in the willows." Dave's eyes went wide with horror. "Fred, for the love, don't swing." Yesterday, I received a friend request from a young, attractive guy, probably around 19 or 20 years old. Curious, I wondered why someone so young would want to connect with me on Facebook, so I accepted the request. Almost immediately, he started messaging me. He called me beautiful and asked my age. I'm an honest person, so I told him the truth and mentioned that I was much older than him. He didn't seem to mind and kept chatting. Honestly, it felt flattering, so I went along with it. Soon he asked if we could talk about adult things. I said sure. He responded, "Thank you, babe. You start." So I did. I told him about my adult things, how I have arthritis and my knees hurt, how my back gets stiff in cold weather, and how I struggle with insomnia. I didn't hold back. I shared about my pacemaker, my reliance on laxatives, and even how proud I am of my high-quality dentures. I gave him the most honest rundown of my adult things I could think of. But for some reason, he blocked me. I'm still scratching my head, wondering why. With the help of a fertility specialist, a 65-year-old woman has a baby. All of her relatives come to visit and meet the newest member of their family. When they ask to see the baby, the new mom says, "Not yet." A little later, they ask to see the baby again. Once more, she says, "Not yet." Finally, they ask, "When the heck can we see the baby?" And the mother says, "When the baby cries." "Why do we have to wait until the baby cries?" Mom says, "Because I forgot where I put it." A scientist had been working in obscurity for years, conducting peculiar experiments on spiders. Finally, he placed an ad in academic journals, announcing a live demonstration of his findings. Curious but skeptical, a large crowd gathered for the event. The scientist walked on stage, silencing the murmurs. "Today, I will demonstrate two groundbreaking discoveries," he declared. "First, spiders can understand and respond to basic commands." The audience chuckled, unconvinced. He opened a box, and a spider crawled out onto the table. "Spider, walk left." The spider moved left. "Spider, walk right." It moved right. Forwards, backwards. The spider obeyed every command. The crowd gasped, then erupted into applause. Then the scientist carefully removed all of the spider's legs. The room fell silent. He leaned in. "Spider, walk left." Nothing. "Spider, walk right." Still nothing. He turned to the audience with a triumphant smile. "And this proves my second discovery. Once you remove a spider's legs, it goes deaf." A priest dies and arrives in heaven. Here, a couple of angels greet him, shake his hand, and welcome him. A few moments later, a drunken Peruvian bus driver appears. He is welcomed with a celebration, fireworks, and God himself comes to welcome him. At this point, the priest, somewhat offended, approaches God and says, "Excuse me, I served the church in your name for an entire lifetime, and I am welcomed worse than this man." God responds, "Your church was never full, my child, but when this man was driving on the streets of Peru, people prayed like never before." Dave was always bragging to his boss. "I know everyone there is to know. Just name someone, anyone, and I know them." Tired of his boasting, his boss decided to call his bluff. "All right, Dave, how about Tom Cruise?" "No problem, boss. Tom and I go way back." So they fly to Hollywood and knock on Tom Cruise's door. Sure enough, Cruise answers and shouts, "Dave, my man, get in here. Let's have a beer." His boss is stunned but still skeptical. "That was a fluke. What about President Biden?" "Joe, of course, let's go." They fly to Washington, join a White House tour, and suddenly Biden spots Dave. "Dave, what a surprise. Come on in, let's have a beer before my meeting." Now the boss is rattled, but still not convinced. "All right, last one, Pope Francis." "Easy," Dave says, "known him for years." They head to the Vatican, but the crowd is massive. Dave sighs. "This won't work. I know the guards. I'll just go up and you'll see me on the balcony with the Pope." Sure enough, half an hour later, Dave steps onto the balcony with Pope Francis. But when he gets back, his boss is on the ground, paramedics surrounding him. Dave rushes over. "Boss, what happened?" His boss, gasping for breath, whispers, "I was fine." Until the guy next to me said, "Who is that on the balcony with Dave?" A blonde walks into a bank in New York City and asks for the loan officer. She says she's going to Europe on business for 2 weeks and needs to borrow $5,000. The bank officer says the bank will need some kind of security for the loan, so the blonde hands over the keys to a new Rolls-Royce. The car is parked on the street in front of the bank. She has the title, and everything checks out. The bank agrees to accept the car as collateral for the loan. The bank's president and its officers all enjoy a good laugh at the blonde for using a $250,000 Rolls as collateral against a $5,000 loan. An employee of the bank then drives the Rolls into the bank's underground garage and parks it there. 2 weeks later, the blonde returns, repays the $5,000 and the interest, which comes to $15.41. The loan officer says, "Miss, we are very happy to have had your business, and this transaction has worked out very nicely, but we are a little puzzled. We checked you out and found that you are a multi-millionaire. What puzzles us is why you would bother to borrow $5,000. The blonde replies, "Where else in New York City can I park my car for 2 weeks for only $15.41 and expect it to be there when I return?" An elderly priest with a twinkle in his eye turned to the younger priest and said, "You had a brilliant idea replacing the first 4 pews with lush bucket theater seats. It's incredible how the front of the church fills up first now." The younger priest smiled and nodded as the older priest continued. And when you suggested adding a little more rhythm to the music, I'll admit I was hesitant. But bringing in that rock and roll gospel choir has been a game changer. Now, our services are packed all the way to the balcony. Thank you, Father, the younger priest replied humbly. I admire your openness to the fresh ideas of youth, the older priest said warmly. Most of your ideas have been wonderful. The younger priest sensed a but coming, and sure enough, the elder priest added, however, I think you've gone too far with the drive-through confessional. But Father, the young priest protested, confessions have doubled and donations are pouring in since I introduced it. The elder priest nodded thoughtfully. Yes, I noticed, and I do appreciate your efforts. But the flashing neon sign on the church roof that says toot and tell or go to hell, well, that simply has to go. A Catholic, a Baptist, and a Mormon are bragging about the size of their families. I have 4 boys, and my wife is expecting another, says the Catholic. 1 more son, and I'll have a basketball team. That's nothing, says the Baptist. I have 10 boys now, and my wife is pregnant with another child. 1 more son, and I'll have a football team. That's nothing, says the Mormon. I have 17 wives, 1 more wife, and I'll have a golf course. Pierre, the dashing French fighter pilot, is with his lover. Oh, Pierre, kiss me, she whispers. He tilts her chin up and leans in, but just before their lips meet, he pours a little red wine on them, then goes in for the kiss. Mon Dieu, Pierre, that was so arousing, so passionate. But tell me, why did you pour red wine on my lips? Pierre smirks. Ma chérie, I am Pierre, the French fighter pilot. When I taste red meat, I pair it with red wine. Oh, Pierre, so romantic. Kiss me again. Lower this time. He unbuttons her blouse, lowers his head. But before he begins, he pours a little white wine on her breast, then indulges. Pierre, that was magnifique. But tell me, why the white wine? He winks. I am Pierre, the French fighter pilot. When I have white meat, I pair it with white wine. Oh, Pierre, you must kiss me even lower. He gets down on one knee, lifts her skirt, and gently pushes aside her bloomers. Just before he begins, he takes out a bottle of cognac, pours a little onto her pubic hair, and sets it alight. Pierre, mon Dieu, why? She shrieks, frantically batting out the flames. Pierre stands, his eyes smoldering. I am Pierre, the French fighter pilot, and when I go down in flames. 2 engineers were standing at the base of a flagpole, looking at its top. A woman walked by and asked what they were doing. We're supposed to find the height of this flagpole, said one, but we don't have a ladder. The woman took a wrench from her purse, loosened a couple of bolts, and laid the pole down on the ground. Then she took a tape measure from her pocketbook, took a measurement, and announced 21 feet 6 inches, and walked away. One engineer shook his head and laughed. A lot of good that does us. We ask for the height and she gives us the length. Both engineers have since quit their engineering jobs and are currently working for Facebook. A lady, about 8 months pregnant, got on a bus and noticed the man across from her, smiling. Feeling a little awkward, she moved to another seat, but the man's smile turned into a grin, so she moved again. The man seemed more amused with each move. By the 4th time she shifted, he burst out laughing. Feeling uncomfortable, she complained to the bus driver, and the man was arrested. In court, the judge asked the man to explain himself. He said, "Well, Your Honor, when she first got on the bus, I noticed her condition. She sat under a sign that said, 'The double mint twins are coming,' and I grinned. Then she moved and sat under a sign that said, 'Slogan's liniment will reduce the swelling,' and I smiled. But when she sat under a sign that said, 'William's big stick did the trick,' I could hardly contain myself. And Your Honor, when she moved to a seat under a sign that said, Goodyear rubber could have prevented this accident. I just lost it. A lady, about 8 months pregnant, got on a bus and noticed the man across from her, smiling. Feeling a little awkward, she moved to another seat, but the man's smile turned into a grin, so she moved again. The man seemed more amused with each move. By the 4th time she shifted, he burst out laughing. Feeling uncomfortable, she complained to the bus driver, and the man was arrested. In court, the judge asked the man to explain himself. He said, "Well, Your Honor, when she first got on the bus, I noticed her condition. She sat under a sign that said, 'The double mint twins are coming,' and I grinned. Then she moved and sat under a sign that said, 'Slogan's liniment will reduce the swelling,' and I smiled. But when she sat under a sign that said, 'William's big stick did the trick,' I could hardly contain myself. And Your Honor, when she moved to a seat under a sign that said, 'Goodyear rubber could have prevented this accident,' I just lost it." Mr. Brown was telling his son a bedtime story. Once upon a time, there was a white bunny. "Geez, Dad, it's boring. What about science fiction?" Okay, Mr. Brown said. "Once upon a time, there was a bunny who got onto a spacecraft and... Dad, a little more grown up." "Do you promise me not to tell your mom?" asked Mr. Brown. "I swear." "Okay, once upon a time, there was a bunny." A married man was visiting his girlfriend when she requested that he shave his beard. "Oh, James, I like your beard, but I would really love to see your handsome face." James replied, "My wife loves this beard. I couldn't possibly do it. She would kill me." "Oh, please?" the girlfriend asked again, in a cute little voice. "Really, I can't," he replied. "My wife loves this beard." The girlfriend asked once more. He sighed and finally gave in. That night, James crawled into bed next to his wife while she was sleeping. The wife was awakened, turned toward him, felt his face and said, "Oh, Michael, you shouldn't be here. My husband will be home soon." The stud rooster at a poultry farm is getting old, so the farmer buys a new one. Once he's arrived, the new rooster walks up to the old one and says, "Listen here, Gramps, this whole farm is mine now." The old rooster says, "Come on, buddy, at least let me stick around with the old hens. We'll stay in the back." The new rooster is adamant. "No way! All the hens are mine." The old rooster sighs and offers a proposition that the two of them race around the farmhouse, and if the old rooster wins, he can stay on the farm. If he loses, then he'll leave and let the new rooster take over. The only catch is that since the old rooster isn't in very good shape, he needs a head start. So the roosters line up. The old one has his head start, and the new rooster takes off. As he comes round the front of the house, the old rooster is just in front of him. He's so close to beating him. He stretches out his neck and leaps forward, desperate to close the gap between them. That's when the farmer looks up from the front porch and sees the two roosters. He takes out his gun, shoots the new rooster in the head, and says, "Damn, third gay rooster this week." An Englishman and an Irishman go to a bakery. The Englishman steals 3 buns and puts them into his pockets and leaves. He says to the Irishman, "That took great skill and guile to steal those buns. The owner didn't even see me." "That's just simple thievery," the Irishman replied. "I'll show you how to do it the honest way and get the same results." The Irishman then proceeded to call out the owner of the bakery and says, "Sir, I want to show you a magic trick." The owner was intrigued, so he came over to see the magic trick. The Irishman asked him for a bun and then he proceeded to eat it. He asked 2 more times, and after eating them again, the owner says, "Okay, my friend, where's the magic trick?" The Irishman then said, "Look in the Englishman's pockets." The preacher, in his Sunday sermon, used "Forgive your enemies" as his subject. After a long sermon, He asked how many were willing to forgive their enemies. About half held up their hands. Not satisfied, he harangued for another 20 minutes and repeated his question. This time he received a response of about 80%. Still unsatisfied, he lectured for another 15 minutes and repeated his question, with all thoughts now on Sunday dinner. All responded except one elderly lady in the rear. Mrs. Jones, are you not willing to forgive your enemies? I don't have any. Mrs. Jones, that is very unusual. How old are you? 93. Mrs. Jones, please come down in front and tell the congregation how a person can live to be 93 and not have an enemy in the world. The little sweetheart of a lady tottered down the aisle, very slowly turned around and said, "It's easy. I just outlived the A customer walks into a restaurant and notices a large sign on the wall that says, $500 if we fail to fill your order. When his waitress arrives, he orders elephant tail on rye. She calmly writes down his order and walks into the kitchen. Almost immediately, he hears an explosion of voices. The restaurant owner comes storming out of the kitchen and up to the customer's table. He slaps down 5 $100 bills in front of the man. "You got me this time, buddy," he says, "but I want you to know this. That's the first time in 10 years we've been out of rye bread." Same time every day at the same bar. This went on for years, and as time went on, the bond between these three men grew into something like a brotherhood. Then one day, as they were having their after-work drinks, two of the fellows seemed really down. That's when one of the friends announced that he was moving to the USA for a job opportunity. Then the second fellow announces that he is moving to South Africa, also for a job opportunity. All three men, now really sad about the fact that their group will be splitting up, decide to make a pact every day after work. Each man will go into a bar and order 3 pints and 3 shots in remembrance of their brotherhood. After months of this tradition, one day, the lad that has stayed in Ireland walks into the bar and orders only 2 beers and 2 shots. The bartender who'd known of the 3 friends and their tradition became worried, so he asked, "Is everything okay, bud? Did you have a falling out with one of your friends? Did someone die?" To which the Irishman responded, "No, they are fine. I've just quit drinking."